Chapter 1. The Daughter Who Was Never Asked. I didn't lose my family in a fight. I lost them in paperwork. While they smiled at Sunday dinners and talked about doing what was best for the family, they were quietly removing my name from decisions and leaving it behind only where blame could land. I didn't scream. I didn't confront anyone. I did what I've done my entire career. I noticed what didn't belong. I documented it. And I waited. My name is Evelyn, and this is the story of how silence was used to control me, and how proof became the only thing that set me free. I stayed later than usual that evening, long after most of the compliance floor had gone quiet. The lights dimmed automatically at 7, casting a soft amber glow that made the rows of desks feel temporary, like a place meant to be passed through rather than occupied. I was used to it. I had built most of my career in rooms like this, where order mattered more than recognition, and precision mattered more than personality. My name is Evelyn Parker. I was 48 years old then, and I had spent over 20 years working in regulatory compliance for a regional bank based in Madison, Wisconsin. It was not a job people bragged about at dinner parties. When strangers asked what I did, their eyes usually glazed over halfway through my explanation. I never minded. Compliance was not about being seen. It was about noticing what other people missed. I shut down my computer carefully, waiting for the system to confirm each step. I gathered the same notebook I had carried for years, its pages filled with small observations and reminders that only made sense to me. I caught my reflection in the darkened window as I stood. Navy blazer. Sensible shoes. Hair pulled back in a way that suggested control even when I felt tired. I looked exactly like someone who had learned to be reliable. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. Early winter had arrived without ceremony, the kind that crept in through shorter days rather than snowstorms. As I unlocked my car, my phone buzzed in my hand. An email notification. I almost ignored it. Work messages could wait until morning. I glanced at the subject line. Family meeting this weekend. Estate update. That alone would not have caught my attention. My parents were in their 70s. Conversations about planning had been circling for years. What made me stop was a phrase in the body of the email, something subtle and technical, something used incorrectly, a legal term applied too loosely, as if copied from a template without understanding its limits. It was the kind of mistake most people never noticed. To me, it felt like a door left ajar. I read the email again, standing there with the cold air seeping through my coat. The message came from my younger brother, Daniel, copied to our parents and the family attorney we had known for as long as I could remember. The tone was casual, reassuring. Just an update, nothing major. We want everyone on the same page. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. I told myself I was overthinking. I had built an entire career on catching small irregularities before they became problems. That instinct did not always turn off at the end of the workday. The drive home was uneventful. Familiar streets, familiar routines. I lived about 15 minutes from the office, in a modest house that felt like a place I had chosen rather than inherited. That distinction mattered to me more than I used to admit. As I cooked dinner, I thought about my family. We like to describe ourselves as close. Family first was something my mother said often, usually when she wanted to end a discussion. It sounded warm. It also carried an expectation of compliance. Daniel had always been the center of that system. 2 years younger than me, confident where I was cautious. He had taken over Ridgeway Logistics, the company my father built in the late 2000s, with an ease that made everyone comfortable. He spoke decisively. He liked clean narratives, growth, expansion, legacy. I had never wanted that role. From the time I was young, I understood that my place in the family was to smooth things over, to be helpful, to adapt. While Daniel was encouraged to lead, I was encouraged to cooperate. My parents fit neatly into those roles. My father, Harold, was 76 then, officially retired, but still signing documents when asked. He trusted familiarity more than scrutiny. My mother, Elaine, was 73 and managed the emotional balance of the family with practiced precision. She believed conflict was more dangerous than silence. That night, my son Tyler came downstairs when I was loading the dishwasher. He was 19, home from college for the weekend, and had inherited my habit of observing before speaking. He asked how work was. I said it was fine. He asked why I looked distracted. I said I was tired. Later, when the house was quiet, I opened my laptop again and reread the email, slowly, line by line. The phrase still bothered me. Not because it was alarming, but because it assumed agreement where none had been given. I considered replying, asking for clarification, suggesting a call. Instead, I saved the message. I created a folder labeled Personal and placed it there. It was a reflex. Documentation before discussion. As I got ready for bed, I replayed moments from childhood I had not thought about in years. Times when decisions were announced rather than discussed. Times when my silence was taken as consent. I had always told myself that was just how families worked. Lying there in the dark, I wondered when silence stopped being a choice and started becoming an expectation. The next morning, I woke early and went through my routine without variation. Coffee, shower, work clothes. At the office, I focused on my caseload with deliberate care. I reviewed reports, I flagged inconsistencies, I corrected minor errors before they could become formal findings. My job had trained me well. Stay ahead of the problem, keep emotions out of it. During lunch, another email arrived confirming the meeting time. Sunday afternoon, at my parents' house, dessert included. The message thanked everyone for their flexibility. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. There it was again, the assumption that attendance equaled agreement. That evening, as I drove home, I considered what it would look like to push back, to ask for details in advance, to request documentation before discussion. Each option carried weight. Each one risked being labeled difficult. I thought about Tyler, about the example I had set for him without realizing it. I had taught him to be careful. I had not taught him to protect himself. At home, I placed my notebook on the kitchen table and opened it. I wrote down the date of the meeting. Underneath it, I wrote one line, review language. That was all. I closed the notebook and felt an unexpected calm, not relief, orientation. Before going to bed, I checked the folder where I had saved the email. It sat there quietly, unremarkable, waiting. I did not know yet what it would lead to. I only knew that something small had shifted. I told myself again that this might be nothing, that families make plans all the time, that my instincts were shaped by a profession that rewarded caution. Still, as I turned off the light, one thought stayed with me. Decisions that do not require your voice often require your cleanup, and I had spent enough years cleaning up for other people to recognize the pattern when it began. Chapter 2. Decisions Made Without Me. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, which was how my family handled anything they considered important but inconvenient. Late enough that no one could claim they were rushed, early enough that it could still be framed as casual. I arrived at my parents' house just outside Madison with my notebook tucked into my bag, the same one I brought to work every day, not because I planned to use it, but because it grounded me. My mother, Elaine, opened the door before I could knock. She hugged me tightly and immediately launched into questions about traffic, about Tyler, about whether I was eating enough vegetables. The rapid-fire concern felt familiar, almost comforting, but I noticed how she never mentioned the reason we were all there. My father, Harold, was already in the living room, sitting in his usual chair with the television muted. He smiled when he saw me and said I looked tired. I said work had been busy. That was true enough. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later, confident as always, carrying a slim folder under his arm. His wife Lauren followed him in, dressed impeccably, talking about a remodel they were planning. She hugged me lightly and said it was good to see me, the way people say it when they are already thinking about something else. We gathered around the dining table with coffee and a cake my mother had baked that morning. Daniel stood rather than sitting, resting his hand on the back of a chair like he was leading a meeting at the office. "I just want to keep this simple," he said. "This is nothing dramatic, just some housekeeping." My mother nodded in agreement. "It is better to take care of these things before they become stressful," she added. Daniel began talking about the company. Ridgeway Logistics was doing well, new contracts, expansion plans. He spoke easily, confidently, the way he always did when numbers were involved. My father listened with pride, occasionally adding a detail from the early days. Then Daniel dialed the family attorney and put him on speaker. The man's voice filled the room, smooth and practiced. He spoke about estate planning in general terms, about efficiency and clarity, about minimizing confusion later. I noticed how often he used phrases like streamlined and aligned. At one point, he mentioned adjustments to existing documents, clarifications of authority, reassignment of certain responsibilities to reflect current involvement. I felt my stomach tighten slightly. He continued, saying these changes had already been discussed and that the goal was to make everything cleaner going forward. I cleared my throat. "When were these discussions?" I asked. There was a brief pause. Daniel answered before the attorney could. "We have been talking about it for a while," he said. "Nothing new, just formalizing what already exists." My mother smiled at me. "It is better this way. One clear structure, less worry for everyone." I asked what that structure looked like. Daniel slid the folder across the table toward me. "You can look if you want," he said lightly, "but there are no surprises." I opened it slowly. The documents were familiar in form, dense with language designed to sound neutral and final at the same time. I scanned them the way I scanned reports at work, not reading every word at first, just tracking flow and emphasis. My name appeared in the early sections, then it faded. I found references to roles and responsibilities, to decision-making authority, to oversight. In the places where control mattered most, I was absent. In places where historical involvement was referenced, I remained. I looked up. "When did I agree to this?" I asked. Daniel laughed softly. "You have never wanted to be involved in this stuff. You trust me. You always have." Lauren chimed in. "It just makes sense. You have your own career. This keeps things simple." My mother reached for my hand. "It is not about excluding you. It is about protecting the family. Your father does not need stress." I looked at my father. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He shifted in his chair. Daniel explained it. I assumed it was fine. The attorney's voice came through the speaker again, reassuring, confident. He said everything was standard, that signatures were being collected, that there was nothing to worry about. I asked to see the signature pages. Daniel hesitated, then flipped to the back of the folder. My parents had signed. I had not. "When was this prepared?" I asked. Daniel shrugged. "Over the last year or so, while you were busy." Busy. The word landed quietly, but heavily. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I asked if I could have copies of everything for my records. "Of course," Daniel said. "Transparency matters." The meeting ended the way these meetings always did, with reassurances, with cake, with my mother insisting I take leftovers home. Daniel talked about an upcoming quarter like nothing had shifted. On the drive back, the sky darkened quickly. Winter came early that year. Tyler texted asking how it went. I replied that it was fine. That was the word I had been trained to use. At home, I laid the papers on the kitchen table and waited for the emailed copies to arrive. When they did, I saved them, printed them, and placed them beside the original email I had saved days earlier. Daniel came downstairs while I was organizing the pages. "Did they ask you what you thought?" I said. "No," I said. "Is that normal?"
he asked. In our family, it has been. He frowned. That does not mean it should be. I did not answer. I was reading dates now, looking at timelines, noticing when decisions had been finalized. Later that night, I wrote one sentence in my notebook: review timelines. I told myself again that I might be overreacting, that this was just paperwork, that families made decisions imperfectly all the time. But as I stacked the documents neatly and turned off the light, I felt something settle in my chest. Not betrayal, not anger, it was clarity.
Chapter 3. The Quiet Woman Who Counts Everything. That feeling did not fade overnight. It sharpened. It followed me into the next morning, into the shower, into the quiet drive to work, and into every routine I completed on autopilot. I was not upset. I was oriented. There is a difference, and I knew it well. At the office, I moved through my responsibilities with practiced ease. I reviewed reports, flagged inconsistencies, responded to inquiries. On the surface, nothing had changed. Underneath, everything had. I was no longer looking outward for problems. I was looking inward, toward my own exposure. That evening, after dinner, I cleared the kitchen table and laid out the documents from the meeting. I did not stack them, I arranged them. Old filings on one side, new revisions on the other. I approached them the way I approached any compliance review. First structure, then flow, then accountability. I started with the estate documents. I traced how authority transferred from one person to another, where consent was required, where it was implied, where silence filled the gaps. I noticed how my name appeared in historical context, attached to legacy entities that still technically existed. I also noticed how newer structures moved around me entirely, clean and intentional. Next came the business records. Ridgeway Logistics had expanded rapidly between 2019 and 2021. New subsidiaries, new accounts, new layers. Growth itself was not suspicious. Growth without transparency was. I pulled public filings and compared them to summaries Daniel had shared casually over holidays. The numbers aligned. The timelines did not. Several key changes had occurred during the period when my mother was ill and I had reduced my presence at family events. I had assumed absence meant neutrality. The paperwork suggested it meant opportunity. I needed another perspective, not someone emotionally invested, not someone who would soften conclusions for the sake of peace. I reached out to Michael Chen, a forensic accountant I had worked with years earlier on a regional audit. He was methodical, blunt, and uninterested in family dynamics. We met at a quiet coffee shop near downtown Madison. I brought a thin folder. He brought a pen and a legal pad. He flipped through the documents without comment for several minutes. His eyes moved quickly, trained to spot patterns rather than details. On the surface, this is tidy, he said finally. And underneath? I asked. He tapped one page, then another. These entities here, he said, they do not do much operationally. That does not make them illegal, it makes them useful. Useful how? I asked. Useful for shifting responsibility, he said, or isolating it. I felt my chest tighten. Where does that leave me? He looked at me directly. Your name is still attached to older structures, not in control, not in authority, but close enough to be associated if questions arise. If there is an investigation, I said. They follow the paper, he replied, and your paper trail is incomplete. The words landed quietly but firmly. I thanked him and paid for our coffee. Outside, the air was sharp with late fall cooled. People passed by carrying groceries, backpacks, conversations. Everyone had something they did not talk about. At home, my son Tyler was waiting at the kitchen counter with his laptop open. He had been reading. I looked up what compliance actually means. It sounds like making sure people follow rules even when they do not want to. That is accurate, I said. He hesitated. Is staying quiet part of that? Sometimes, I said, but not when silence creates risk. He nodded slowly. So which one is this? I did not answer immediately. Instead, I gathered the documents and slid them back into the folder. That night, I went through old emails, casual notes from Daniel, updates framed as information rather than requests, language that assumed alignment, language that treated my lack of response as agreement. A pattern emerged, not malicious, efficient. Decisions moved forward because no one expected me to stop them. That realization hurt more than the documents. My family did not see me as expendable. They saw me as dependable, someone who would absorb discomfort quietly, someone who would handle consequences if they appeared. I slept poorly and woke early. By mid-morning, I knew what my next step needed to be. I called Sarah Mitchell, a civil attorney I had known professionally for years. She specialized in estate and corporate disputes, not sensational cases, but quiet ones that hinged on documentation. We met in her office later that week. I handed her the folder without explanation. She read carefully, once, then again. "You have good instincts," she said. "I am not looking to accuse anyone," I said. "I just need to understand my position." She nodded. "Your position is exposed." "In what way?" "You're connected enough to be questioned, but removed enough to be unprotected." "If I do nothing," I asked. "Then you rely on everyone else to act in good faith. That is not a strategy, that is hope." I leaned back in the chair. "And if I only tell the truth?" She met my eyes. "Then the truth will move on its own timeline. You just have to decide whether you are willing to stand where it leads." I left her office without making a decision. I didn't need to. The path ahead was no longer vague. It was narrow, but it was visible. That night, I placed the estate documents beside the business filings. I added Michael's notes. I added Sarah's card. For the first time since the meeting at my parents' house, I did not feel confused or sidelined. I felt positioned. I understood then that I had not been pushed out. I had been placed, quietly, strategically. And now that I could see the shape of that position, I knew something had to change. Silence had carried me far, but it was no longer neutral. For the first time, that realization did not scare me.
Chapter 4. When silence stops protecting anyone. The moment I understood my position, the pressure began to change shape. It did not explode. It tightened. It moved from the edges of my thoughts into the center of my days, asking one question over and over again. How long could I stay silent without becoming complicit? I did not confront anyone right away. That was never my instinct. I gathered information, clarified boundaries, and waited. Experience had taught me that people reveal more when they believe nothing has changed. The first sign came from my mother. She called late one afternoon while I was still at my desk. I watched her name light up my phone and felt the familiar mix of obligation and caution settle in my chest. "Evelyn, are you busy?" she asked, her voice already strained. "I can talk," I said. She did not ask how I was. She went straight to it. "Daniel says you met with a lawyer." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I spoke with someone, yes." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Why would you do that without telling us?" "I wanted to understand the paperwork," I said. "That felt reasonable." "It looks bad," she said. "It makes it seem like you do not trust your own family." "I am trying to understand my risk," I replied. Her tone softened, but the weight increased. "Your father has not been sleeping well.
All this stress is hard on him. He keeps asking if everything is all right. There it was, the lever she had always known how to pull. I am not trying to cause stress, I said carefully. I am trying to prevent something worse. She sighed. Sometimes prevention looks like patience. We have always handled things quietly. Quietly does not always mean safely, I said. There was a long silence. You raised me better than this, she said finally. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Shame framed as concern. You raised me to be responsible. That is what I am doing. She ended the call soon after, saying she needed to check on my father. I sat there for several seconds after the line went dead, phone still in my hand, feeling the familiar pressure to smooth things over. I did not act on it. 2 days later, Daniel asked to meet. He suggested lunch near his office, a place he liked because the staff greeted him by name. I agreed, knowing exactly why he had chosen it. He arrived relaxed, confident, already talking about a new contract before we even sat down. When the server left, he leaned back and folded his arms. Mom is worried. She thinks you're spiraling. I am not spiraling, I said. I am paying attention. He smiled faintly. You have always been like this, looking for problems. I look for risk, I said. That is my job. This is family, not a compliance audit. I met his eyes. Then why does it feel like one? His smile faded. You didn't have to bring in outsiders. You could have come to me. I did, I said, at the meeting. I asked questions. And I answered them, he said. You just didn't like the answers. I took a breath. Did you expect me to carry responsibility if something went wrong? He hesitated, just briefly. Then he shrugged. You have always handled the difficult parts. You're good at it. That was not my question, I said. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, in business, someone has to be close enough to explain decisions if things get messy. You were involved early. That history matters. So does control, I said. Control is overrated. What matters is trust, and I trusted that you would not let the family down. There it was, not an admission, an assumption. You planned for the worst, and you planned for me to absorb it. He frowned. I planned for continuity. You always talk about protecting the family. Not at the expense of one person, I said. He shook his head. You're overthinking this. Nothing bad is going to happen. And if it does? I asked quietly. He looked away. Then we deal with it. I stood up. No, I said. Then I deal with it. He did not stop me as I walked out. He assumed I would calm down. That assumption had carried him far. That night, my mother called again. This time she cried. She said she didn't recognize me. She said families didn't survive this kind of suspicion. She said I was breaking something precious. I listened. When she finished, I spoke. I am not breaking anything. I am refusing to carry something that was never mine. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with the stack of documents. In front of me, for the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. I had not been trusted. I had been relied upon. There was a difference, and I had lived inside it for years. The next morning, I met with Sarah again. I don't want to argue, I told her. I don't want to accuse anyone emotionally. I want clarity. Then we document, she said. We prepare. That language grounded me. Over the next several days, I gathered everything. Emails, filings, notes from meetings, timelines that showed when authority shifted and when my presence quietly disappeared. I did not editorialize. I organized. At work, my focus sharpened. At home, I slept better. My son noticed. You seem calmer, he said one evening. I am. I stopped trying to convince people who benefit from misunderstanding me. He considered that. Does that mean it's over? No, it means I know what comes next. That night, I placed the final set of documents into a clean folder, not as a threat, as a boundary. I was done negotiating with feelings. Feelings could be dismissed. Evidence could not. When I turned off the light, I felt no anger, no triumph, no desire to confront anyone further, just readiness. Silence had protected them for years. It was time to protect myself.
Chapter 5. Proof is louder than blood. What happened next felt less like a confrontation and more like a system correcting itself. Once the documents were assembled, once timelines were aligned and responsibilities mapped clearly, the situation stopped belonging to my family and started belonging to the process. Sarah and Michael worked quietly. There were no dramatic emails, no accusations framed as ultimatums, just formal requests sent to Ridgeway Logistics and its legal counsel. Requests for clarification, requests for explanation, requests that required written answers rather than reassurances spoken across a dinner table. I sat in Sarah's office the day the first responses came back. Her desk was neat, her movements precise. "This is enough," she said, sliding a document toward me. "You are formally removed from any implied responsibility going forward, effective immediately." I felt my shoulders drop, a release so subtle I almost missed it. "And Daniel?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. "That depends on how he answers the remaining questions, and how much he chooses to disclose." There was no courtroom, no raised voices, just a temporary freeze on certain controls within the company while explanations were reviewed. It was enough to shift the balance, enough to interrupt the assumption that things would continue as they always had. Daniel called that night. "You went too far," he said, his voice tight and unfamiliar. "I went far enough," I replied. "You could have handled this inside the family." "I tried," I said. "You decided what that looked like." He accused me of overreacting, of embarrassing him, of putting the company at risk. I listened until he finished. "I did not create this risk. I named it." He hung up without saying goodbye. Lauren left a voicemail the next day. She said people were asking questions. She said this was humiliating. She said I was damaging something my father built. I did not return the call. My parents reacted the way I expected. My mother cried quietly, as if mourning a version of the family she believed had existed. She asked why I did not trust them. She asked how I could do this to my own brother. I did not do anything to him. I stopped doing something for him. My father asked to meet in person. We sat in the living room where the meeting had taken place weeks earlier. The same chairs, the same table. He looked smaller than I remembered. I signed what they put in front of me. I did not read it closely. "I know," I said. He nodded slowly. I should have. There was no apology, just acknowledgement. It was enough. The review concluded without spectacle. Control returned to the company with new oversight in place. Daniel kept his role, but not the unchecked authority he had assumed was permanent. Lauren stepped back from public involvement. The attorney who had guided the original changes retired soon after. No one was destroyed. No one was vindicated. The system adjusted, the way systems do when pressure is applied in the right place. Sarah asked if I wanted to take on an advisory role. There were options: temporary authority, formal influence. "I do not want power," I said. "I want distance." She smiled. "That is the clearest answer I have heard." At home, Tyler watched everything unfold quietly. One evening, as we washed dishes together, he looked at me. "You did not yell. You did not try to win." "I did not need to," I replied. "So what did you do?" "I chose where I stand," I said. He nodded, absorbing that. Life settled into something new, not what it had been, but something more honest. I returned fully to my work. Compliance had not changed, but my relationship to it had. I no longer mistook silence for stability, or endurance for virtue. My family adjusted.
Conversations became careful. Some distances remained. I accepted that. Not everything needs to be repaired to be resolved. Months later, I found the original email saved in my personal folder. I read it once more, then closed it without emotion. It had done its job. If you are listening to this and recognizing parts of yourself, I want you to hear something clearly. Strength does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like documentation. Sometimes it looks like refusing to clean up a mess you did not make. Living well is not about proving someone wrong. It is about deciding what you will no longer carry. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause or reconsider a silence you have been holding, stay here. There are more stories like this. Quiet ones, careful ones, stories about choosing yourself without burning everything down. I am still the same woman. I still notice small things. The difference is that now, when something feels off, I do not assume it is my responsibility to absorb it. And that has made all the difference.